Hello and welcome to another episode of Deconstructing ADHD. This is a series of podcast episodes on Heal with Helen podcast, where I am sharing my insights and findings before and after a diagnosis of ADHD. And I've learned so much, some things I knew before a diagnosis, some after, and many of that those things have been confirmed about what I instinctively knew was true. Now, everything I talk about is based on my own personal lived experience or what I've read from scientists and experts, psychiatrists, and their experience, research that also aligns with my experience. So as everything is subjective. And what I encourage you to do is to do your own research. Don't just take for granted what you've been told by the medical profession, by your doctors or whatever. It's great for a starting point, as it was for me, but it also, I have to take responsibility for myself and my own healing. Now, none of this is intended as a substitute for medical advice. The idea is I hope to inspire, empower, and enable people to take control of their lives, get their lives back. And in the process of getting your life back is a process of grieving. And this is going to be the main focus of this episode. I'm going to talk about the grieving process. Now, there have been numerous books and articles written about the stages of grief. And now, in my experience, yes, there are stages, but they don't necessarily happen in a linear order. And you may not experience all these stages, or some might last longer than others. There is no one path, really. There's no one specific way that the grieving process is going to happen for everybody. It's as unique as we are because it's based on our own beliefs, our own conditioning is how we deal with that. Now, I mentioned when I read about ADHD back in June 2021 that I was at quite a low point in my life. I was praying for answers, and initially that gave me some. It's like anything, sometimes these labels can be helpful to ground ourselves, but based on, lots of spiritual teachings, lots of Buddhist teachings, for example, I knew deep down that I cannot define myself by this. But it helped me through that grieving process. So a diagnosis can mean different things to different people. But the most important thing that I've learned is that don't get attached to it. Because attachment is the cause of suffering when we get attached to things. And eventually we lose them. And that's why, grieving can be so painful, because if we're really attached to something, then the loss causes very difficult emotions and feelings and this process. And I think in the Western world as well, we don't acknowledge this enough because we don't give people enough time. It's like, oh, you can have 2 days off work for the funeral, then come back. And that might be helpful in some cases, but also there can be that tendency to get busy and avoid what you're feeling. And by this stage in my life, as I was a lot older than most people are when they have a diagnosis, I knew that I have to feel whatever I'm feeling. I have to go through this, because if I don't, it's only going to come back at a later stage to bite me on the bum. And however difficult it is, that is something I need to do. Now, I mentioned previously that my doctor didn't recommend ADHD medication, and I was not really a fan of taking it anyway, although part of me was curious as to know what it would be like. But again, this attachment to something outside of me is only going to cause suffering further down the line. And we can see that happening now, where there's a shortage of ADHD medication because people are taking it, and it might be the right thing. You know, as I said in the beginning episode, there's no judgment there. It can be helpful as a starting point, as long as you realize that that is not the solution, and taking it with full awareness. And I realized that, okay, I wouldn't be doing this for the right reasons. I'm doing this because I'm curious about what it will be like. And I mean, I wouldn't go and take any other sort of recreational drugs because I'm curious about what it will be like to take cocaine or heroin or something. So why would I do this? And it just because something is legally sanctioned doesn't mean that you can't get attached to it or addicted to it, whatever word you want to use. It can be habit forming, let's say. And I think, you know, when I was going through a difficult stage earlier this year, and I was very emotionally dysregulated, and my doctor did recommend taking some antidepressants. And I did get to the point where I actually went to the chemists and I got them. And then when I got them, I thought, I don't need these. There was just something in that, just having them there. That there was some kind of comfort in that. Oh, well, they're there for me. And at the time, I was also doing the EFT tapping summit, doing lots of tapping, emotional freedom technique, and I got out of that funk. And in the end, I didn't need to take them, but I was prepared to do that because I thought, well, maybe this will just be a temporary measure. But there was no way that that was going to be a permanent solution. I knew that. So in terms of the grieving process then, that was for me this realization, all my dreams that I'd had as a child and the things that I thought I would have achieved and done by the time I was coming to the end of my 6th decade hadn't really happened. But I felt, I've just muddled through life, gone from one thing to another. But then I realized that's just because of society's expectations. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. I've done lots of things. You know, I've got a degree. I've raised 3 children, mostly on my own, and they are pretty much fully functioning. My oldest has lots of problems, but he's still alive, and he stays cheerful. So really, it was only that grief comes from me judging myself by society's expectations. And at the same time, that's not to dismiss or belittle what I was feeling. It felt real. I knew that there was healing to be done. I felt angry about this, angry about all the money that I'd spent, for example, which is why I'd got into financial problems and why I was thinking, why isn't any of this working for me? Because I spent a lot of money on programs and coaches, and because there's that seeking part of me that wants answers, that wants to heal, that wants to overcome suffering. And I'm realizing as I get older that that's actually quite a rare thing. Not rare in the sense that we want to overcome suffering, but to find, but to find it from within rather than from external sources, because it means going to those difficult, dark places, feeling all those yucky, icky emotions, and not trying to avoid them and distract yourself, which we all do, and I do as well. And I know sometimes that I'm doing it, and I knew at this stage, right, I need to take a break from work, doing anything, trying to build a business, get my head straight, because it was like, for me, it felt like everything's been building up, building up, building up, like a pressure cooker, and then you take the lid off, and all the feelings come out. And something similar had happened a few years previously when after my ex-husband had died, and you just can't stop it. And it was that there was a lot of anger. Now that is one of those stages, that anger that needs to come out. We are told that anger is a bad thing, but it isn't necessarily. It is bad if you get angry and go and punch somebody and hurt somebody, but we can use anger in positive ways. We can use it to challenge injustices and help to make the world a better place for everybody, make it more equitable, and raise awareness through things that we're angry about. Look, this isn't right, and challenge people's conceptions and things like that. So that was okay. And it's okay for me to feel angry and feeling that perhaps there were times in my life where I wasn't taken seriously. My needs had been dismissed, especially being female as well, being told either explicitly or it's implicit in our culture that my needs, my wants aren't as important as those of the male members of my family. Even when I got married, I don't want to move to this new town where he was going because he got a job. Well, it's his job. You go where his job is. It's like, well, what about what I want? That didn't matter. And of course, all this suppressing my own needs then causes that depression, that you're suppressing what you want, what you're feeling, because you believe that you don't matter. And then of course that comes out. And I mentioned before that this time taught me that actually it's okay to reach out and ask support. I just need to talk to somebody, need to have a rant. That's okay, because it's healthy. I'm expressing my feelings. I'm not doing it in a way that's hurting anybody. I'm going to talk to professional mental health professionals, counselors, or whatever. Call the helpline and speak to somebody who's there. That's their job. They're trained to do that. They'll be getting supervision, and I can be honest about what I'm feeling, and I know I'm not going to be judged. And I think that's one of the key importance. So there's that anger stage. There's the sense also that grieving for the life that I could have had if we as women growing up hadn't been told, that our needs weren't as important as men, or more opportunities for careers or things that we wanted to do. I mean, I was never really, I couldn't see a career that I wanted. I was creative, but most females of my generation at that time, the options were you could go to university. I went to grammar school, but you do become a teacher, a nurse, some kind of medical profession, get an office job, work in a bank, secretary, those kind of things. And I know, of course, there were other opportunities, like to become a musician or an actor, because there are plenty of creative professionals my age, but a lot of them, you see, they come from those kind of backgrounds. So it's very much in our conditioning. My father was a teacher, and I couldn't and I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to break out of that. No, I don't want to do that. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but there was no space to explore that. Well, you've got to get a job. So I went and did accounting, bookkeeping, thought about becoming an accountant. But then when I learned about all the law you had to study, I thought, no, that's not for me. But I loved doing the numbers and the bookkeeping, and that was a great thing to do because I can do all my own books now and I don't need to pay somebody to do that. And it's something that I enjoy. So, so yeah, there was all that for the life that I could have had. And not to dismiss that as nothing, because a lot of the time we brought out, oh no, oh, that's nothing, I'm fine. But allow myself to be honest about that yes, if I could go back and I could do things differently, well, this is what I would have done maybe. And in that, it's also partly that denial stage that I'm making all this up, that everything's okay, and I am lazy, and I am a bad person, and all that kind of thing, and I'm not trying hard enough. And so there was all that stage to go through, and then finally the final stage, whatever stages you go through, whichever order, however many stages there are. I've seen different ones. I've seen 5, I've seen 7, but then eventually there has to come some kind of acceptance. So what are you accepting here? So for me, it's accepting who I am, everything that I've been through, all my experiences that have made me the person that I am today. And some of that is it's not my fault. It's society, it's our conditioning. And the next stage, really, I've come out of this sort of another low point, another depression, if you like. And then that's when I really feel that I'm starting to heal now. But that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been through all that, if I hadn't allowed myself to do that. And it's difficult in lots of ways. It's difficult because the feelings are difficult. And it's like there's a lovely little thing that goes around. It's saying, today I'm going to be mindful and in the moment. Unless that moment is uncomfortable, then I'm going to eat a cookie, which sums it up really. It's like, are we prepared to sit with those uncomfortable emotions? And I was going through at a retreat in February, and at this time, this was just before I went to the doctors and was prescribed the antidepressants, and I was really I literally could not see a future for myself. I was that low, really, shall we say. But I was in a supportive environment, and one night I woke up in the middle of the night, and where there's no street lights in this place, it's in the countryside, it's completely dark, can't see a thing, but there was this little voice in my head that says, but Helen, you deserve to live. And that was like that turning point. Oh, yes, I do. I do deserve this. I deserve to live just as much as anybody else does. I deserve to be happy just as much as anybody else does. And then I was able to start sort of crawling out of it, really. I still didn't really know what lies ahead, but then none of us do. That's just an illusion. And the previous year, when I was going through all this grieving process, all the things that I could have done, I was thinking about things that I achieved then. What's been consistent in my life for the past 17 years is meditation. So I'm going to focus on that, on meditation, because I know this helps me, and I'm going to keep on spreading the word about it, putting my guided meditations on YouTube. I did have a break for a while because I wasn't in the place to do that, but I still have my own practice, and that for me, it doesn't matter who I'm teaching, it benefits everybody. And the idea that it's easier for some people than others is just Well, that's just not true. It's not always easy. It's not easy for anybody. Even if they've been meditating for years, you're still dealing with the mind and the mental states, and that's unique. So it's got nothing to do with what you've been told by doctors or anybody else, or what is this thing called ADHD or whatever. It's your mind, it's your experience, and it's unique for you. So that's the next stage really on my journey, was the grieving process. And then coming out of that, the next step, which I will talk about in the next episode, and I'm going to mention some books, in a lot of books in that one, because I did read a lot of books. I still am, on the brain and how the brain works. I mean, and I'd read books on this before, Joe Dispenza, and I knew there's part of me that knows that this is not a fixed thing. This is something that I can heal from. I can rewire my brain, because plenty of people have done it. And there's also now the science to back that up. So there's no reason why I'm starting now, crawling out of this depression, doing the EFT tapping, which, if you go back to a previous episode of an interview I did a couple of years ago with Peter Stapleton, and she did a lot of research on tapping and the effect on the brain, and it rewires the brain. So it is possible to recreate those neural pathways that are, and you don't need to be stuck. You don't need to struggle with emotional regulation. You don't need to struggle with the executive functioning or anything like that. And you don't need to keep taking the drugs. They might help at the beginning to just get to that place, because it may, like I was lucky. I had a massive toolbox of strategies that I had at my disposal to help me through that grieving process. And it's not for the faint-hearted. It really isn't. And that's why there's a disclaimer at the beginning that this isn't a substitute for medical advice. And that's something you need to understand. I have thousands of hours of meditation practice. I've been on over 50 retreats, a lot of them silent, where you're sitting there for a week, you're not talking to anybody. So you're just there with your mind. You can't distract yourself by watching TV, going on your phone. And a lot of meditation teachers recommend that you don't even read, so you haven't got any input coming in to add to what's there already. So that takes dedication. And I know from my experience that even a lot of people I meet on retreats don't go on as many as I do. I'm a bit of a retreat junkie, which is a good thing to be addicted to, because I'm lucky. I volunteer. I've created these conditions in my life so I can do this work. But it doesn't matter. You do whatever's right for you at your level. And because of the depth of my practice, my experience, and because I was able to come through this myself with support, of course, that's not to deny the support that I've had and I still have, but there's that experience. So wherever, even if you're right at the beginning, you know that this is possible, but you've also got to know that you're in it for the long haul, pretty much the rest of your life. Because once you heal one thing, and this is what was happening, back in June 2021, another layer is coming off. Yeah, I've done all this work, I've done all this healing, but I've healed that, and then another one comes off, because it won't all happen at once, because you would literally die if it did. So it happens gradually over time, and if you're able to get through each stage, then the next one, I'm not going to say it necessarily becomes any easier, but because you've got that, it gives you faith that you've got through this before, you'll get through it again. So that's what I would say. Leave that as a takeaway for this episode. Keep the faith that you have the strength, you have the inner resources to get through whatever challenges you come up against. And most of those challenges are just our minds. They're not real threats these days. We're mostly living in a safe world. And the biggest challenge we face is our beliefs that we believe to be true, but they're not. And it's just our mind. So thank you again for listening. And I'll see you on the next episode, where I'm going to talk about some of my findings about trauma. I think I have spoken briefly on a earlier episode about this. I'm going to go into this in more depth and recommend some of the books that I read, and how when I was reading this, it was like a light bulb going on, and how it related to my diagnosis of ADHD. And perhaps things weren't what they seemed. They rarely are they? And that's the thing. It's about being open and not being attached to your beliefs and your ideas, and being prepared to change those and have your opinions smashed. And I think, oh, what I thought was true or real isn't. So thank you again, and I will be back on the next episode of Deconstructing ADHD very soon. In the meantime, take care, go well, and lots of love.